Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're about 2 minutes after 6. Let's go ahead and get started with our evening. First, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and I'd like to thank our speaker for joining us. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. If you are in a modular class and are attending as part of your career readiness requirement, please remember to fill out the form in your Google Classroom to make sure that you get credit for attending. Also, please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. You're certainly welcome and encouraged to use chat and questions and comments. We should have plenty of time at the end for Q&A. Tonight we are joined by Mike Overwine
Matt.
to talk, or I'm sorry, Matt Overwine to talk with us about digital product design. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I did prepare. I'm going to try to pay attention to the camera on this, my laptop here. I have a lot of my stuff open over here on the left-hand side. So if I look away, that's why I'm over here on the other screen here. So I did write up some stuff for this. So I will try to read from what I wrote because I figure I want to give you all the best information I can. And I did try to prepare. So I'll use that to help prepare. I'm good to share my screen, right? Okay. Let's do that. And hopefully you'll have to tell me if things end up being too big. When I share like my larger monitor, I can always, I can always move stuff around if need be. I'm trying to be able to look at you all and also look at my material as I can. All right, so let's see here. Present now, I guess, right? Let's see here. We will share. Oh, I see. It's just changed since last I've been in Google Meet. It's fun. We'll go with just Miro here. Let's see if it works. Okay, do you all see, whoa gosh. Also I have hot corners enabled on my computer here. So is this sign, or I'm sorry, is this size okay for you all? Everyone can read okay? Okay, cool. I'll probably just scroll around like this. So yes, my name is Matt Overwine, and I am a digital product designer, I guess. I'm a lot of things, but I am definitely a digital product designer. You can call me Matt though, if you want to connect afterwards, feel free, of course. I lived in Northern Kentucky most of my life, and this is specifically Code Kentucky, right? So I figured that's worth mentioning. I live right across the river from Cincinnati, Ohio, right across the Ohio River. So, I kind of live in the Cincinnati metropolitan area, and been here pretty much my whole life. For some general background, see, I'm having a good time here with my slides, sorry. For some general background, I attended the University of Kentucky in 1999, where I bounced around the post-secondary education, computer science, and telecommunication majors before eventually failing out, which is why I have this nice X over here, because I did not graduate from that program, any of those programs. I returned home to attend NKU, Northern Kentucky University, where I found the graphic design major, but also failed out again, mostly because I wasn't really concentrating on my studies. I was still trying to work mostly full-time. On my third attempt, I finally graduated with a BFA in visual communication design, which is what graphic design eventually became, which is essentially a 5-year art degree, right? So you might be asking yourself why someone like myself might be presenting to Code Kentucky, maybe. I did think about that a bit, and I was thinking I would sort of just talk through how I got into coding at all, because I know that you all might be in different code levels. I know you're kind of in the training period, right? So you could have a lot of knowledge that even I don't have still. But when I first started programming, I actually started by breaking my friends' MySpace pages by writing HTML in the comments sections. They didn't have anything that kind of scrubbed that out of there, so I went through and just made like 2,000 pixel wide images across my friends' comment sections, and it just absolutely ruined those non-responsive web pages that were from the 1024 by 768 resolution days, if any of you are old enough to remember those. Around the same time, I also installed a pirated version of Macromedia Flash on my gaming PC and picked up on timeline animation and ActionScript. And for those of you who don't know, ActionScript is kind of like JavaScript. It's pretty similar in a lot of ways. So I just grabbed a couple of logos of some of the old, these are the old logos too, which is what I find incredibly funny because, a lot of these things aren't even around anymore. When I finally invested my now diagnosed ADHD focus into NKU's design program, they trained me in the Adobe products like Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, and After Effects. I promptly stole that software from the lab computers, which you could do at that time. Now you can't do that stuff. So I could have them on my personal Mac laptop at that point, right? So, I was able to get the software. It's really all I needed, of course, along with the education. But when an Adobe purchased Flash, I was able to integrate kind of everything I knew at that point into my design work as I was learning, and also got to steal a new version of Flash that when it was adopted by Adobe too. My first programming gig was part-time in the NKU College of Arts and Sciences Dean's Office, of all places. Our group was tasked with creating online classes for college teachers, but this is also back in 2006, 2007, when that really wasn't happening. For some reason, only design students ever worked there, not computer science majors, which really confused us all for obvious reasons. But we did work, a few of us worked over the course of a year and a half on a number of projects that use coding languages like Cold Fusion, which is another Adobe product that you can see here. Great logos. Flash and ActionScript, of course, which I've mentioned a couple times, but then also HTML and CSS and JavaScript, mostly jQuery at that point. But I also picked up on PHP, MySQL, and Access, which are both database languages, as you probably know. Let me move a slide here. More fun stuff. Through my, we'll call it aesthetic quote training and technical training, those were kind of on different sides of the campus, but it all happened at NKU's campus for the most part. I had some experience coming into that with technology, but not a ton. Eventually, I became what I used to be called was a unicorn, someone who knew both designers' software and the knowledge and code to translate it to the web, right? So it's kind of like in that in-between point, walking the line between design and development, even back then, but I didn't really understand it at that point. I kind of like the unicorn term these days, so I had Midjourney come up with something funny for, just for the presentation. So there you go. That's the unicorn I am. Let's see here. From 2008 to 2017, I know that's a long time, but that's the span. I worked at various marketing and advertising agencies in the greater Cincinnati area because that's what designers did at the time. I then took a stab at solo freelancing, where I built a lot of WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, other CMS. Those are CMSs if you're not familiar. I built a lot of those websites for local businesses around that time. I got my first UI UX style project designing a learning management system skin for Moodle, if anyone's ever heard of it, in 2018, which doesn't feel very long ago. I also had a front-end development gig at the time where I learned Angular. This is when I really started to understand what clients wanted in this kind of like UI UX space, which is basically someone who understood how to design for the web and devices, and who also understood the real limitations of what code could realistically do, right? Which makes a lot of sense. In 2018, I took my first digital product design gig at Everything But the House. And so this slide here is just showing you kind of some of the, I know these logos came in pretty low quality, unfortunately, sorry. But these are some of the places I worked in the agency biz. I was always freelancing. And then really when I got into product work, this Everything But the House job, EBTH as we all called it, was really the first real product job I had. I was also, while I was working as a digital product designer at Everything But the House, I was also building front-end code in React at the same time, just because they needed it and I could do it. I only lasted there 6 months before funding kind of dropped out, and I was part of a massive layoff. But, it was a really good experience for me kind of learning how things worked. Meanwhile, I had been teaching at NKU since 2016 as an adjunct professor. At this, let's see here, in the same program I had earned my degree, so the same teachers. I had some of them as coworkers at that point. When P&G didn't hire me permanently, it actually timed. I had a small position at P&G, sorry, I didn't really connect that. It actually timed out pretty well with an opening as a full-time, what they called professor of practice in visual communication design at NKU. I applied and got the position. And teaching was really great because I was kind of like the guy who was teaching designers how to code and how to design digital products, right? Because we are some of those people. Among the many design-related classes I taught in the 4 years I was teaching full-time, I most enjoyed the design program's HTML and CSS class and the digital product design class, kind of what I just said. To keep my skills fresh, I continued freelancing UI UX projects. To be completely honest, the amount of money I was making by teaching and freelancing was decent, but it was a lot more than 40 hours a week, and I have young kids. Last year, at the end of the spring semester, I stepped back into the marketing and advertising agency biz at Madison Design, which is actually where I'm at now, as a senior UI UX designer and front-end developer. So I kind of still, walk that unicorn line, whatever that means. So, this is kind of some of my history here, just in general. Let's see here. So that's kind of like my background as I guess, a quote professional. I don't always feel professional, but because I've jumped around jobs a lot technically over the years, but I do know a lot of stuff, which does help, I guess. So I've talked a lot about my history, but now I want to talk about digital product design specifically. So let's see here. Oh boy. So what is digital product design? And so I'm going to describe it, but this is actually a screenshot from my process document that I have used, and I actually include in my portfolio these days because people like to know my process, and so this is a lot of it. Digital product design is the process of imagining, prototyping, and building digital software along with the brand experience surrounding it. And I'm sure you all kind of understand that, right? Because you're in the software biz. The building digital software part is often expensive, which is where you all come in, right? Which is why you're learning these skills. Expensive meaning well paid. As software developers, you are often the people who build what people like me design. But development is design, in my opinion at least, development is kind of design of a different kind, right? Because you're designing software, you're kind of making it all work. And to me, development is something I still very much respect because I still struggle to write a non-jQuery based function constantly. It's still hard for me, even though I'm still programming pretty often. I just don't do, a ton of big kind of software applications at this point. So I just don't need a ton of knowledge. As much code as I know, I feel like in this group specifically, I have to say, like, I'm kind of a hack, right? I've never had a real development class ever. I think I had a C++ class back at UK where I found out of that. That's as closest I got to a real actual like development education. So, kudos to you for getting one. Let's see here. I don't want to talk about that process too much. But so like, what does a digital product designer actually do, right? Like, sure, we might help design software, right? But like, how does that come about? What I feel like I'm really good at is I know how to talk with business owners and other stakeholders, quote stakeholders, which could be kind of anyone who's involved in the project, right? And I'm good at workshopping through the information I need to understand how their business and or product works, and kind of like what they need, what their goal is. Sometimes additional research is needed, but sometimes just talking to the clients alone is good enough. Once I understand everything, I kind of say everything in quotes. Once I understand as much as I can start prototyping. Usually I start on paper and then move to digital. There's a lot of software that helps us make clickable prototypes these days. As progress is made, it is shared with the stakeholders for their approval. Once there is a clickable prototype approved, I can hand it off to development. And that's really when you all can start doing your work, right? Because then you have all your screens and you kind of know how they connect, and then you could start considering that architecture in the code. For many of the processes I use specific, what we tend to call methods that can be expressed as information graphics usually. Most of the work is done in a workshop with the stakeholders. Once I understand the business, like I said, I can do a lot of the work myself, but oftentimes checking in with the client is important, especially when the project, whatever I do will affect the business's bottom line, or, especially someone's job, which is kind of like what it was like at Everything But the House. I got to go in and look at the people who were packaging up these different things that they were selling and understand kind of how their job worked, so I could understand what the interface would need to, be, how the interface should be improved to make their job easier. And I know that just in general, this sounds probably pretty broad, right? Which it is. So I think the best option at this point is probably just to continue down some slides and to kind of show some example projects, because I think that once you kind of see what I did for some of these individual projects, I think it might help you to understand, I guess, what I do. I mean, I guess I could talk about this process a little bit. So, this is how I really kind of approach every single project. And I have a couple things bolded in here. And those are my preferences for the things to use to solve certain problems. But there are a lot of different, quote, methods to use for these different things. Like a requirement analysis, I'll show you a couple of those. We call that the Moscow method. Maybe not the greatest thing to call it these days, but you can see that Moscow right there. A value proposition canvas. I don't know if you all know what these things are, but we'll see some of these things. Stakeholder interviews, ecosystem experience maps. All of these things are basically just information graphics to help us all agree on how something's going to work. User research, usually a lot of the companies we work with right now have a lot of the research already kind of done, especially if the company already exists. They already know who their target audience is. They know who they're trying to sell to, right? So a lot of times they have to tell us and explain how they're doing that. Storyboarding is a good one for user research because you can kind of walk through a step-by-step process. Service blueprint is a big one that I use these days, and I have a good example of that one to show you. When I get into planning the product, I do a lot of UX brainstorming, which I can show you. Then there's consumer journey maps is one of my favorites, but I don't get to use it too much. Use cases and scenarios and user flows. These are kind of similar things that you all may have seen. User flows often describe a user's pathway through the software, right, or through the screens, let's say. So I love making user flows because it really simplifies the user experience overall. Really, when I get into designing the actual, let's call it the UI, I'm usually getting down to paper at that point. Sketches and wireframes, wire flows, which are just connected wireframes to me. That's what I call them. I don't know if that's really what everyone else calls them. Then we get into low fidelity prototyping, and usually I go straight to digital with prototyping, and I use things like Adobe XD or now I guess technically Adobe Figma that is now that they purchased last year for $20 billion or something. It's nonsense. I really use those tools to actually design the things and then give them off, to people like you. So then I design the UI. I usually make a kit of parts that kind of shows off, what is in the brand, because I do have that brand knowledge. You can also have a pattern library, which describes a lot of how, let's say that product has been broken down, and so to use repeated patterns. There's also the idea of micro interactions, and those are kind of like your feedback, right? I'm sure you all maybe have heard of those. And then high fidelity prototyping is really kind of combining the brand and the product you're designing, right? So that's really when you get to making it look like it's supposed to look, maybe even on a particular device that it's being programmed for, like a phone or a tablet or something. And of course, you have to test and iterate. Last step. Sometimes you do user interviews. You have them click through the prototype that you've built, even before development, keep in mind. You have them click through it and give suggestions. You can also do A/B testing if you want to try something, right? That's something that you all probably know too. And then you could do testing and surveys for all that as well. The new feature prototyping, physical digital, this is basically just, if there's a physical product that is involved with the digital product, you oftentimes have to bring that in there too, right? So that can be interesting. So yeah, I just figured I'd ramble on about that. Like I say, this is my process, not the process, because there are many ways to think about this. So now we get into some specific examples. And I promise I'll pause for questions at some point. Hopefully you all have some. So Linkadoo was really, I know that's a funny name, but it was like Link Education is kind of what the name was based off of. And let me read again. I was blabbering on there for a minute. Yeah, so Linkadoo. In 2016, I was freelancing for Linkadoo, a tech education startup out of UpTech in Northern Kentucky. I wasn't nearly as good a dev as I am now, so I was mostly serving as a UI UX designer. Here you can see some wireframes connected as a kind of user flow. I call these kinds of things wire flows these days, and that's this is kind of like a wire flow because there's many wireframes within there. And it's you can kind of follow the path around, right? As we got to, I think I should just read here. As I got approval on the lower fidelity version, the one I have highlighted there, I moved to create more detailed page layouts. They didn't have the dev talent to pull this off, unfortunately. So, the product never really came about. But it was a really good experience for me because I got to wireframe and really kind of build all these pages without branding, which I find to be a good exercise for understanding interfaces and things like that. We actually did have a functioning version, but it just wasn't built very well. So yeah, this one here is a lower fidelity. Oh boy, a lower fidelity wireframe / wire flow is how I would think about it. And as you can see, we kind of have main navigation up here and some arrows to point around sort of the flow of how you would get through, registering, adding a new board, because they were kind of making a Pinterest type thing, Pinterest clone for education essentially. And then once I got some approvals, I moved into actually trying to rough out more specific page designs with, more specific UI. Then also sort of describing the user experience, in this detailed wireflow summary. And yeah, you always have to label everything. Once again, it's kind of just an infographic, right? Like I have to take the information, summarize it in some way, and present it to people who maybe don't know what I'm doing or really anything about development, and get their approval to move forward, right? So this is the more detailed version. And then we ended up having full-on page designs, but they all still had lorem ipsum in them, I believe. So these are pretty old. This is 2016. It's a long time ago now. The next project I want to talk about is Everything But the House. And I actually have, I believe I have a clickable prototype to share about this one. So I'll read what I have first, and then I'll show you that. In 2018, I had a short-lived gig as a digital product designer and front-end developer for Everything But the House, or EBTH. They had a large team of product managers, designers, front-end and back-end devs. So it was nice to have a real software team, right? Because I hadn't really had that before. While I was there, I helped build a tool called Lasso, which helped build, and this is really specific, but which helped build online sales informed by historical sales data, if that makes any sense. To me, this was interesting because there was already a lot of software built to support their bidding website. That's what EBTH is really just estate sales bidding. So I had to jump right into their React code base and learn it, right? Luckily, I had experience in Angular, so I kind of knew what to do, but it's different code. They worked in 5-week sprints as well, which I thought was pretty interesting, and had daily stand-ups. And I'm sure those are some of the things that you all are learning with Scrum Masters and such, right? Let's see what I can talk about here. So a lot of times in the, you could call it anything. You call it UI, UX process, digital product design process. People could talk, I would even almost call it software design sometimes. But you can see the arm of my product manager here, who basically ran through what the MVP would be for this Lasso product idea, for this Lasso feature, I guess you could kind of call it. And the Lasso feature involved a number of features. So you can kind of see here, we called it the sale builder at that time, didn't have a name. And these were all the things that it had to do. So notice you have all these specifics here. They're just listed out: SQL, save, search builder, sales summary, multi-select, save, sort, thinking about all the different features it needs to have. Sales summary had its own. So, kind of breaking things down. You can see sales summary here, and then we went deeper into the sales summary there. And these are all metrics that they have in their database, right? So we were just trying to figure out what to do with them. And we, as with most development processes and design processes, I guess, you always have nice to haves if there's more time, right? And so that's what the NTHs are down here. So drag and drop, that's a nice to have, right? It's not required, but it'd be cool. Multiple sales tabs, green, yellow, red, just thinking about what we could add in there, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in there. Item detail, you can see it had to have, specifics in there. And this ended up being the final kind of screen. I think this is a shot from the actual software. So this is how all that came together. And there was a lot of iteration in there. And I even built this was a clickable prototype built with, this one was built with Figma, I believe. And I think I still have that. So let me see if I can open it to kind of give you an idea what I built before. Let me see here. Here we go. No, it looks like it was XD. What we had, because we all had Adobe stuff. So as you can kind of see here, let's see if it works still. I don't know if you guys can see this. Can you? Oops, hold on. Hey, are all of you awake in there? Everyone doing okay? Okay. Let's see here. I'm going to stop presenting a second, and then I'm going to reshare something else because I realized I was going somewhere else that you don't see. So a lot of times what these clickable prototypes look like, let's do, yeah. It looks something like this, right? So it is design software. So it's not, to avoid an infinity mirror, don't share. Okay, I don't care about that. So you kind of have all the screens, but I can't put a database behind this thing. I can't actually make anything really work. So what I have to do is I have to basically just fake it all, right? That's really what a lot of us product designers are doing, is we don't have the code knowledge to build everything. So we've got to fake it and get approval for how it's supposed to look and function, sort of. And then you have to get it in front of a dev to say, hey, is this possible? But I think one of my strong suits is I usually know if it's possible or not, because I've been around the dev community enough to know. I'm not going to sell a bunch of I'm not going to sell a feature that's something I couldn't do mostly myself, right? It's just kind of how it goes. But all of these individual, I'm just trying to look to see if all the things are still connected here. Hold on. Usually they show their connections, but this is a pretty old file as well. But I could still just talk about it right now. So you'll notice that each of these screens is basically just a little different. And as you go, you have to make an adjustment to each of these based on what interaction you want to have happen. So let's say that you have a button. Let's just start the prototype just to show you. So if I start this prototype, this is a website quote, right? But it's not really functioning. So it's just sitting here and it is going to wait for me to do something. So notice that if I click on, I don't think anything's actually working anymore. That's not good. Oh, well. Yeah, I figured I should probably look at these a little more ahead of time. But basically, the way it works is you have to click through each of the options. I really wish I could show you this one. I thought it was going to work. Let me see here. There's nothing to click on, huh? Dang. That'd been fun. But it allows you to step through the entire process of what you're trying to accomplish, but it's just static screens. There's no database behind it. There's no HTML involved. There's no CSS involved. There's no compiling of anything. You really end up just having a screen, and you might make something like this preview button down here. You might allow someone to click on it and have that go to another screen. So in a way, it allows you to move through the whole process that you've designed without any data actually being transacted on the back end. And it allows someone who doesn't have the ability to design a prototype, someone who doesn't have the ability to do any coding, to look at kind of how it's working and agree that, hey, this looks like a good user experience overall for what we're trying to accomplish, right? So I'm going to move on from this project because I can probably show off some better stuff. Yeah, let's keep going. So I made a sales tool, kind of boring, but yay, sales tools. All right, let's go back to that presentation here. Yes, that one. All right, so that was everything but the house. It was really nice there because I got to sit next to a bunch of devs, which, devs are my friends. The next project I can go on a little bit about is this one called Synchronize. And so I'll read what I have to say about that one. So this was the previous project was in 2018. In 2019, I didn't even have that job anymore. So in 2019, I freelanced for the University of Cincinnati's Innovation Hub, if you've heard of that. Another tech startup, basically another tech startup scene. Theirs was more university-based. So my project involved a digital product called Synchronize with an ER cardiologist from their medical center over there. He wanted to create a digital interface for crash carts, the paddles you often see on TV, right? The things that shock your chest. I liked this project because it really showed me the value of research and asking good questions. So I'm sure you all know that too. Dr. Harris was the guy's name, the cardiologist, was talking to me, the designer, through the process of correcting someone's heart rhythm. And to me, that was very difficult. I was not trained in any way, shape, or form on medical stuff. So I knew very little of what he was talking about at first, but I realized a lot of the information graphics he was showing me were similar to my own in some ways. After a few meetings, I was able to piece together an understanding of the ICU crash cart team and what they did. I call these kind of sketches you see here and here. I call these UI UX brainstorm kind of sketches, because these are all done on a whiteboard, which is why they look that way. But really, it was just taking notes in the best way I could imagine, right? Because like really, when you have a doctor talking to you and you're trying to understand something fairly complex, which is basically this on the right here, this cardiac arrest algorithm, he basically handed this to me and said, yeah, we need to do this. And I'm like, what? I don't know any of these things. How am I going to make this work? And the sketches on the left here, this one and this one, this is my first sketch of what was going on here in this cardiac arrest algorithm. And this was my second sketch. Notice how much more detailed this is. This was my second sketch of the whole process. And if you look, I have notes specifically applying to UX. I have notes specifically applying to, I wasn't sure at the time. I was like, it's sort of more specific to the app UX and the UI specifically. Lots of notes there. And then I started considering really what all is in the room, because when you're designing a product for a physical space, it's much different than if you just have, if it's a Facebook or something like that, that's 100% digital, right? For something like Synchronize, there was a large component that was physical, right? There's a lot of people in the room. And so each of these circles you see in this highlighted image here are people. So you have people switching off on CPR. You've got a cart over here. You've got a nurse who runs that cart. You got a medical nurse. I don't really know what all these people are. There's an access person who basically makes sure their airways are clean. So there's all these people around, but the only person using the interface is this person down here called the scribe. So that person was the only person I was really designing for, because they already knew what was going on in the room. I was the person that didn't know what was going on in the room. So it's really about creating the interface, because everything at that point was done on paper. And that took a long time to file and everything, right? Which seems pretty crazy that UC Medical would have still been doing a lot of paperwork in 2019, but hey, they were. Let's see, what else do I have for this one? Right, technology had come a long way since 2016 when I first started doing UI UX projects. So I actually had a clickable prototype ability now, right? I had already been using XD at everything but the house. So I just kind of carried those skills over to here. I built an Adobe XD prototype for Dr. Harris to share with the investors, but COVID hit shortly afterwards, and I never really heard what happened with the project after that. Because this is a freelance project; it's not something I have to continually pay attention to, right? So these are some of the UX kind of, let's call them methods, quote methods that I use. This is the Moscow method, and what this stands for is the M is must. So this is feature prioritization, by the way. Must, should, could, and won't. So must is what you spend 80% of your time on, right? So these are a lot of the important features. Should are things like nice to haves, like I showed from the everything but the house board. Could is basically if you have any extra time, you would use it on could. And won't is basically saying, hey, we're not actually going to do these things. These features are definitely not going to be there. And I always find this one very useful for just sketching out really quick and kind of convincing my clients that it's better to focus on these features versus these features for XYZ reason, right? So this is, I mean, my handwriting's terrible, but you can at least see that it's not super high tech what I'm doing a lot of the times, right? I'm just talking to someone. Often I'm talking to the subject matter expert and trying to understand what they know, right? And I have to figure it out. And I do enjoy that part of whatever I do, right? This gig. I also actually did all the branding for this. So, I'm a designer, so I actually made all of the branding for this. And I think I have open the final presentation that I made for this. And I, once again, could not find the clickable prototype for this one either. But also XD is being discontinued, which I think is maybe part of the problem. So I can at least just show you really quickly what all I did for this. This is the logo. And I built this deck too. So I'm good at kind of talking through my ideas and showing off, things for investors and clients. I'm not going to read you all this nonsense, but I broke down the explanation of this product into branding, user interface design, user experience design, and prototype design. Branding, I didn't go to it too much, but I use different hex colors. This is all designer stuff. I think about this as a bit of a kit of parts, right? Because this shows how buttons might look, sort of like your primary and secondary buttons, let's say, and maybe some tabs, how they might look. Talks about typography, which typeface you might use, those types of things. So just showing off things. What's interesting about this project is Dr. Harris had built a UI prototype. Not that clicking on it worked, but he built this in PowerPoint, and this is what he gave me. Like, here, this is what I want you to build. And I'm like, what? And so, but this was actually a really good starting point. You're talking to a cardiologist. I mean, obviously pretty educated, so he probably knows some stuff. So I took him at his level of intelligence and tried to use this as a good starting point. You've already seen these images. So that's how I started understanding the user experience, was from those sketches. And it felt, it's funny. I have to be very honest sometimes in my job. Sometimes I didn't get it the first time, right? Like maybe he, in this first meetup over here on the left. Can you guys see this stuff? Hold on, let me go back over here. Yeah, you can. Okay, just making sure. I have it hidden while I read my stuff. But yeah, I don't always get everything the first time because I don't know what questions to ask the first time all the time. So this first time was like the first meetup. The second meetup, I got way closer to what it actually was going to be because I asked lots of good questions. I just wanted to reiterate that. Let's see here, next page for this one. Right, so prototype design. And so this was all built in XD. I started by thinking about the lock screen, but then, I realized I needed to take a step back. So I actually did something that was very much without a brand first, right? So this is like the first prototype screen that I built, kind of not thinking about the brand as much. But eventually I got into creating more branded screens with the same information and really just kind of, dressing it up a little bit. So this was the home screen, because the way that this thing kind of worked is, you don't know when someone's going to start dying in the ICU, right? So you kind of have to wait until it's happening. So basically this, imagine a 12.5-inch iPad Pro is sitting on top of a crash cart, and it is sitting on this let's get to work screen over here. Basically says disconnect to begin, right? Like the instructions are all on there. And as you unplug it even, it starts going through the CPR process. And I'm not going to bore you with that. But the idea is that it tells you, instead of having to just know the process and you don't normally have like a little book, you just have to know the process. So instead of having to do that though, this can give you instructions for the whole thing. So screens like this here, where it talks about audio tone, for instance, that was a big thing for what they wanted, because if you do an audio tone, if you make a sound every 0.6 seconds, that helps with people doing CPR, things I had no idea about, right? And then you can check. You could check off.
I hate to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Should we be seeing something about the audio tones right now? I'm not sure. Is my screen frozen, or if we're not seeing it?
And you guys are
see the synchronized logo.
Yeah, I see the synchronized logo right
Sorry,
now.
that's my bad. I keep trying to share individual screen pieces here, not the whole screen. I'm trying not to just show all the crap I have open.
That's
so give
quite
me
all
a second here, and then I'll show you what I meant to show you. It's been a long day. I'm just playing. It's not that bad.
Yeah, no, we appreciate your time.
It's all good. So, so imagine I rewinded my voice a few, and these are the things I was trying to show you. Sorry. See, it's like I'm being on mute or something, right? So this is the deck I put together. So I talked about how I separated out the individual pieces of this, talked about the brand. I talked about the kit of parts, where it had all the different web components on one page, talking about hex codes, typefaces, primary and secondary buttons, tabs, things like that. Yeah, now it makes more sense what I'm saying, right? And
yes, and it looks much better too.
Yeah, thank you. And so this was the prototype that Dr. Harris put together in PowerPoint. So, not bad really. But it looks like it's made in PowerPoint. Once I started, these are the images you've seen that I started talking about the first meetup and second meetup, basically, and how I really kind of evolved from asking some questions to asking more questions and getting more detailed answers. This was the first screen I created, but then realized I had to take a step back to make it a little bit less branded for the first iteration, just to get things to work. And then here are some of the screens I was just talking about, I think. So when I was talking about the lock screen, this is that home screen, right? Imagine it's locked and sitting in the hallway somewhere, or wherever they put crash carts. And then you disconnect it, and it immediately begins counting the CPR timing. I see some questions here. I might stop and answer some here in a minute, but I promise I won't ignore you. So yeah, this is the lock screen. Once you unlock it, it starts showing the CPR instructions and starts sounding an audio tone, which is not something I could create in the prototype software at the time. I think you can do sound now, but the idea is that this 0.6 seconds here. This helps you do the CPR compressions at the right rate. These are all, like I said, these are all things I just had no idea about. And then you could click these little buttons, these little circles, and it would check them off. Like I said, I really wish I just had this prototype to show you, but the screens will do. Once you had marked off all of the initial, basically the checklist you needed to do as soon as you knew someone was coding, like you have to make sure CPR is initiated. Like that's the first thing you have to do when you walk into the room. I did not know that. You also have to make sure the monitor and defibrillator are attached, right? So that's the little shock paddles. So you have to go ahead and attach that, because if you're not seeing their heart rate, then you have no idea what's wrong with their heart, supposedly. I don't really know. I just know because I was told that. You can also at any time, oh gosh, that wasn't great. You can also at any time declare the code, because sometimes certain markers, certain things that are happening to the person will automatically mean they're having a certain type of code. So let's just pretend that this thing has gone through a minute and 45 of time, right? And it is now, waiting for you to check these off. You've checked these off, and it moves you to this screen, the code declaration page. This declare code button essentially leads to the code declaration page. There, I think, are more than just these 6 types of ways that your heart can be doing wrong things. I don't really know. But the one that I had to build for was just that that chart you saw that was for cardiac arrest. So that's why the example that I chose for this was the only example I needed to know, right? So when you click on cardiac arrest algorithm, then you can start filling out all of the rest of the details. And you got to remember that in a real life situation, this person would be dying on the table while this is happening, right? So it's obviously important enough to let them be able to enter whatever information they can at the time. So that's why there are all these tabs around the bottom, so they can switch between different content types that they need to add, whether it's, well, you can see what they are. It's patient. So it's talking about the patient specifics about their, the stuff up top here, essentially. The position, there are positions. Each of those positions I described on this page. All these people, all these circles are all positions. So you have to assign who's in what position. That's something the scribe has to do. So that's why you have this kind of position tab down here. The algorithm can change depending on, like, if you shock them. Sometimes the algorithm, their heart might be doing something different now. So then you can also come back here and change the code. And then the devices is what you see over here. And this was, minimally designed really when it comes down to it. But this allowed them to drag over what devices are connected to the person. Because there's lots of, as you can imagine, in the ER room, there are lots of devices, right? There's lots of things for lots of different functionality. So I didn't know which icons to use for these. I was like, can I just use the same icon for this? Because I don't know what I don't know what any of the devices really are. So we just use this because, you're going to probably have an IV put in first. So that was the first example I used. And the whole idea of this, where'd I go here? The whole idea of this app was really for the activity, which I'm not sure I showed the activity page because it was a pretty boring one. But imagine that every single button click that you put into this, it logs that information, right? And that was a big one because a lot of times when things were done by paper, they didn't really have the ability to walk out to someone's relatives. Let's say someone died from cardiac arrest or something like that. They had no way of knowing what had actually happened in the room when the doctor came out. The doctor would come out like, I don't, this is what I think happened. But if you had it all digital, of course, that means it could be run immediately and you could just have a report for when you walked out to talk to someone's relatives, right? So that's really the whole idea behind this. And it sounds great for that reason, but it was also for insurance reasons, for, making sure that people weren't like doing malpractice things, that kind of stuff. And it's much easier to do when it's digital versus completely on paper. All right, I've already talked about this one too much. Yeah, I've already kind of talked about these. All right, let's move on. That's enough. So, I feel like I'm being kind of boring here, just showing off lots of projects. So let me go over here and look at this. Here's the chat. Okay, here we go. I was like, where's this at? Okay, so the first one I see, feel free to write your questions here. Yeah, I agree with that. No, can't see your XD screen. Thank you. I should have looked here earlier. What are some good examples of good questions to ask in general? Okay. So good questions. I actually have a list here because I do this stuff all the time. So when I get into an initial client meeting, and you got to remember, I'm oftentimes coming from the design perspective, but coming from the design perspective, I still need to understand the technology being used because I know enough about the technology to design for it is how I kind of think about it. So when I come into a new project, the big thing is like, what's the purpose of the project you're working on? Like, what's the reason? Why do you have me in the building? Why are you talking to me specifically? What is the purpose of that app that you're trying to, or sometimes it's not an app, sometimes it's just one single feature on a website, right? It doesn't have to be an app, because most things aren't just an entire app. That's way more expensive than a website or something else. So I think a good question is, what's the purpose? And I would even say, to some extent, that's probably a good question for you to ask people too. Is what is the purpose of this app? Like, why are we building this thing? There should be a good answer for that, right? Let's see here. What are some other good ones I can mention? Who is the target audience? That's a very designerly question. But I would say knowing who you're building something for is just as important as how it's built. Because if you don't know what that person is trying to accomplish, then you may be designing features that no one is going to use, right? Which is why I consider design and development kind of like a hand-in-hand, partnership in a lot of ways. Because if I'm going to try to design something, that doesn't necessarily mean it's possible, right? But because I have been developing, I do know a little bit closer to what can actually be made. And I realize more things are coming around every day, but you can't just design something and expect it to work in code, right? That's just not how things work. All right, I'll move on. What platform and technology? What's your stack? Of course, is a good one to know. Certain functionality is only with certain stacks, and especially if you're talking to a dev community. Let's see here. What devices will a design be used on? Like this Synchronize app was meant specifically for one device size. But as you all know, that's not usually how the internet works, right? Most of the time, you're going to have the website, which has to be responsive, right? And the responsiveness will make it work all in a browser, but there may also be the need for an iOS app and then for an Android app, right? Those are all basically, different situations. And all of those are different touch points in a way. If you understand the word touch point, that really just refers to how you're experiencing a brand experience, or how you're experiencing a brand, right? So, and when you talk about a touch point is always it's always a device specific. So when you view let's call it, when you view TikTok on your phone, your phone is a touch point, but also the app software is part of that touch point as well, right? So some experiences don't have desktop experiences, right? So some of them only have app experiences. So you really have to think about that in general, and how something will be created and where it will sit. So asking where it's going to be is a big thing to me, because if I can't create it, then I have to hire someone who can, right? So which is you all usually. Let's see here. What content and what assets do you have? If I come into a project, oftentimes some of the companies don't have a lot of research, and so sometimes I'll have to put in some research hours so that I can go try to figure things out, because they may not have an idea of really who their target audience is, or they've just forgotten someone. Oftentimes. Let's see here. Are these helpful at all? Okay, well, I'll just keep going for a minute here.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
No problem. If you have any data, that's a big thing too. Like, we can all install Google Analytics, right? But oftentimes there's deeper data than just Google Analytics. So if they can export out analytics for me to understand who their users are anymore, understand which pages get more views, understand what buttons get more clicks, all of that is really important to understanding a product. And sometimes it's related to the brand, and sometimes it's just related to the product, right? So I try to separate those things out. Let's see here. Accessibility is a big one these days. Like almost everything should be accessible if the company can afford it anyway these days, right? So if they don't have accessibility in place, they might need it. So once again, that's another specialist, right? It's really just about filling the gaps for a client a lot of times for me. Like they come in not knowing really, and they kind of shrug, and I'm like, well, here's what I do. And they might cherry pick a few things specifically based on what budget they have, but they oftentimes have no idea. Someone may have made the product and isn't with the company anymore. There's lots of things like that, right? Let's see here. Legal is important too. Every single project that we do here in the building at Madison, gets put in front of legal at the company, right? So sometimes we'll create some copy because we have a copywriter. He usually sits right behind me here. And he might create something that's a great idea and that helps the interface for whatever I'm designing really well. But if it's not legal, if it's not something you could just put out there, then like, well, that didn't work out very well. And that doesn't mean anything vulgar. It just more means like, you can't say that. You can't say that this product can do that, right? Certain things like that. So legal is always a big one too. If you ask, about the legality of or what things need to be put in front of legal, that's oftentimes important. I guess is really what I'm trying to say. Scalability is a big one that I often ask about. Like, how many people do you have? How many users do you have on this? We have a project that might happen for Cintas, if you're familiar with them. Cintas is kind of a boring company, but I find creating interfaces that help streamline a business I find that work okay. Even if dropping off mats and uniforms isn't very exciting, keeping people informed and creating good digital products is okay by me. But they are trying to use an augmented reality kind of feature, let's call it, to help install some of their stuff, right? So imagine you walk in with I think they use Microsoft tablets or Surfaces, and they walk in and they could take a picture of the environment or, with the camera on, place some of the things they're trying to do, their first aid cabinets, essentially. But imagine you could kind of put it on the wall, take a picture, and also take specifications and enter that in there. And then that can be passed around the rest of Cintas. But they're really only hiring us. We'll see if we get hired for it. But if they let me inside the system, that's what I really have to know. So if I get into their system and I see that there's no way to just drop this thing in there, right? Like, I don't know what their interface looks like. So I have to ask a lot of questions as I get into these different things. Like, where's it going to be? If there's already a program, or if there's already software on these things, how can I fit this in there somewhere? Where am I supposed to put it? I have lots of questions when I get into a new project, especially when there's existing software. I'm rambling again. But the scalability part, they've got like hundreds of people that use these things every day, right? So if I go in and I drop this AR thing in the wrong spot, that's going to affect a lot of people's work. Especially if they don't know how to use it. So a lot of times, you also have to ask how things are trained. Like, if it's an internal business situation, you oftentimes have to ask, like, how is someone going to even learn how to use this thing I just made? And that oftentimes means that I get put in charge of creating documentation as well, which is pretty funny to me because it's like, well, someone has to do technical documentation, right? Or else no one will know at all. I could keep going on. There's so many things that I could ramble on about on this list right here specifically. But for the most part, I'm really trying to target the people who are using the app. That I need to know them, and I need to know how the business runs. And from there, I can throw things. I can throw things at the people who want me to design things, and then I can run them by the users too. And if you can if they can agree at the same time, that's really where the strength is, right? I can say, oh yeah, your boss agrees, and you want it that way. That's really a win-win situation, right? So you just have to be very curious when you walk into a building that people might be pretty boring in their daily workload, but they like being asked questions sometimes. So even Cintas gives me a lot of really good answers when I try to ask, about their users and about the data they have. I don't know if we'll get that project specifically, but I'm looking forward to it if we do. I'm going to look through some of these questions again real quick, and I can always share more work, but I want to go through these questions before it gets too late. Yeah, no one sees it. Also, where would you put accessibility concerns in the Moscow hierarchy? Okay, well, Moscow stuff. I would say it's kind of like a must these days. So must, remember, the Moscow basically stands for must, should, could, won't. So a lot of the brands that, I should just say clients, a lot of the clients that we have these days really are looking for accessibility first. If you all know, I'm sure you all know how to use the inspect tools in your browser, right? I know that's a big part of it. There in Google Chrome, there is a Lighthouse rating. I don't know if you all have seen Lighthouse before, but that is how you can actually understand how accessible someone's, that's only for Chrome, so you can only access things that are in Chrome or on the web, for instance. But there are other tools that also do apps and things like that. But they basically look to make sure that colors are high enough contrast, against whatever colors they're sitting on, right? Because that makes it harder to read if there's less contrast. So there's like contrast ratios that are what we all look for these days. So we even have brands that are coming and asking like, hey, can you make our brand colors accessible? And that's something you can do, right? But as far as accessibility, otherwise, it's a lot of alt tags and images. It's a lot of link titles, I believe, is a big one. But really, I would put it as a must. Long answer short, because really, I oftentimes think about how someone with how they list it. It's it doesn't have to be just blind, but it's someone who could have a sight limitation too, right? And same thing for like physical mobility. They have certain types of mice that can be used when you have a major physical disability, and you can use like tab through lots of things right on the web, and that's all part of accessibility too. So I'm getting to be better at all of that stuff automatically these days, but we also have companies that come in and ask us, like, hey, can you make all this? It's usually an add-on, like, oh, and also let's make everything accessible, right? And it's not cheap either, because it's a lot of time to really invest in to make sure that a screen reader can read your website correctly, which is not easy to do. So yes, accessibility, I would definitely put it at the top. Can you talk a little bit about the freelance process? How do you connect with clients? I would say that really I was only able, the things that allowed me to freelance were, one, skills that no one else had or wanted to use. The first time I really started freelancing was for Flash banner ads, if you remember those things. And that's not good, it's a bunch of crap, but at the same time, that was how I got my foot in the door for doing other types of projects too. Like, hey, do you know anyone who could do banner ads? And I was like, hey, I'm the banner ad guy. And for years and early in my career, I did all kinds of trash work. And I say that lovingly in a way, because it paid. Like my freelance rate was always higher than what I was being paid normally, right? That's how it usually goes. So like where I was making whatever I was making at my first gig, like whatever I was making on the freelance stuff was just butter. It was great, because it wasn't really hard work. It's just work that no one else wanted to do, and no one else in town as a developer really wanted to do any of that stuff. Which is really funny, because I still do HTML5 banner ads sometimes now, and I'm always like just shaking my head the whole time, like, how am I this guy still doing this stuff? That's definitely not digital product design work, but sometimes you have to do different stuff. The other thing that really will help with your freelance process is having jobs, right? Because when you have a job, that person might, the people you work next to may end up with another job too. Do that another 5 or 6 times, and you have this network of people that you used to work with. And they've all kind of gone their own way, and then they know what you can do, and so they might call you. Now, I always feel like, I have imposter syndrome, like everyone else, I imagine, and I never really thought I was very good at any of the things that I did or do. But people keep calling me. Even now, I have to turn down freelance, and it's because they know that I care enough to do a good job. Even if I mess it up the first time, I'll come back and fix it. That's development a lot of times. No worries. I'll see you later. This is only until 7, right? Or is this later?
We can go until 7:30 if you like. Okay. We can end.
Well, it's really what people want to do. I can stay here a minute. Is there any? Let's see. What about clients? Let's see here. How do you connect with clients? So a lot of times, it's really just having like a project manager contact me from one agency and ask me to work on one of their projects. is how that I get introduced to clients a lot of times. When I was freelancing, I definitely made my own website. I will say that. So make sure you can't put yourself out there without a website, in my opinion. So I'm sure you can all make some websites these days, right? So, it's really about putting yourself out there in whatever way you can. Make sure, your LinkedIn stuff is set up to be, going to your website. Set up your social stuff to not look like you're a crazy person. I kind of had that problem when I first started out, when you're on Facebook just goofing off or whatever it is, someone's going to come find that stuff. They're your external public persona. I'm going to call it that. AI question, cool. You have to make sure that you curate your public persona. I always joke that it's user experience. Like, imagine someone is trying to find you and ask you to do work. They look you up on the internet. What's the first thing that shows up when you search your name? I would look at that, right? And if you own your domain name, that helps a little bit too, right, for SEO type stuff. So the longer you have yourself out there, the more people will find it just automatically, in my opinion. But you have to make sure that you kind of curate that to be that public persona to be what you want to be doing, right? Like kind of like dress for the job you want a little bit, right? That's a phrase. It's kind of like make your public persona for the job you want, because if I looked crazy, I feel like people probably looked away from my website or whatever. So I've always tried to be more buttoned up, when it comes down to how I look from an external perspective, even if it's a little soulless sometimes. And then when you get in the door, you can see if it matches really when it comes down to it. And freelance is the same way, really. If they find you and you connect, that's great. Do you connect as a group of people? That's what you really want. And that's why I keep saying, make your public persona look like the thing you want to be doing. Highlight the projects that you want to be doing. Don't highlight all of the projects. It's another thing to say too. Like I don't even have a website right now because once I got this job, I was like, well, I'm going to redo my website, and I haven't really touched it in like a year and a half because I don't need one anymore, right? Like if I lost my job tomorrow, I would have a website tomorrow, guaranteed. I'd figure it out, but I don't really want any more freelance work, so I don't really chase it down anymore. Really trying to draw those boundaries now that I have kids and stuff. That's kind of where I landed after a while. Let's see here. Are you interacting with AI in your work, and in what way? Yeah, I do. I have a paid Midjourney account. I have a ChatGPT account. I've got Google Bard. I've got Ideogram. I've got no problem. I don't necessarily use them for anything at work. I would say, because you're asking in what way am I using them. I think I use them more for kind of for playing around with ideas and iterating through them. So if I have an idea of I'm not oftentimes doing logos anymore, but even if I come up with a pretty good prompt for Midjourney for something related to imagery, it can export out some pretty good stuff. And I don't see it really replacing me. I would love for it to in some ways, but I do see it as something that you can use to generate ideas faster. And if you're really good at writing up prompts, then it can be something you can use to kind of like get that first edition out, that first version out. And some of them are getting better and better with text. I recently just listened to a podcast about DaVinci 002 or something like that. I don't know how they say it, but it's an AI that has a lot of capabilities. But still, I don't see it replacing me really specifically. What I will say is I have been using code to write out basic HTML structures, because that's the most boring part to me. Is like, all right, I got to throw all this together and I got to make it all work. Well, can I ask Google Bard to, and that's what I usually use for code for some reason. And I'll ask it like, hey, can you create, a div with an unordered list with 5 list items? I can even voice prompt that and it works. And that's kind of like where I see the future of AI going, possibly anyway, is me I just want to be able to talk to it and have it put something in my computer. Because if I can get better at describing code, which is hard, really, I could say, oh yeah, can you, place a div with the class, Baconator or whatever it happens to be. But it's going to get better and better at doing those things. And I don't necessarily need to be writing, I don't need to hit every single key of HTML structure. Like there's nothing I'm bringing to the table with HTML structure that is like mind blowing. You can almost say the same thing with CSS sometimes. I like to write really efficient CSS if I can. But if I can also just talk to the AI and say, hey, create me 3 classes, for font size, small, medium, and large, or something like that, right? Like that's the kind of stuff that I see in the future where I can make my custom classes much faster. I don't use any bootstraps or anything like that. I don't use any of those kind of frameworks, but I know about them all and I like them. But a lot of times I don't need all the bloat what comes along with it most of the time, right? So a lot of it is really just learning the AI technology and kind of paying attention to it. But to be completely honest, what I use AI for the most is making images for my Dungeons and Dragons games. So that's what I do. Nerd crap. Yeah, AI is good at writing code. I'll say that. Now, have I asked it to write me like a JavaScript function? I have, but it doesn't give me what I want usually in there yet. But I imagine it'll only get better because we're only into this AI thing, a couple of years at most, really, at this point. So I think your knowledge of code will be good too, because I really believe that you should only be asking AI for like code if you know what that code would do anyway, right? So it's almost like just doing it a little faster for you, and then you can modify some things and move on. It's a little harder from the designer perspective because it can't do text very well yet, and typography is a big portion of design that it's not super great at yet. Ideogram is a free one that actually is better with text, and I've been playing around with that, trying to get it to do it right. But I have the free version, so I'm probably not getting everything it can do, for the most part. Well, okay. I don't necessarily want to keep blabbering on about nothing. What else can I offer you all while I'm here? I can give you some more time. I have one closing thought that I want to give to you before I really sign off. But that's all I have. I got through my presentation as best I could. I can't believe I didn't find any of those prototypes, but they're probably on my other computer. What kind of questions do you have? Anything else? Hopefully that made some sense. I'm trying to. The idea of digital product design is pretty new. When it comes down to it, and it's really important for your jobs because you're going to be making something that I design possibly, right? So learning the nomenclature that the design world has is important, and being able to talk to designers is important because we're usually pretty nice. At least I am. I don't know, and I like talking dev work too. So there's a lot of designers like that out there who kind of walk the line, but we're not going to be as good as the people who actually learn the real stuff, which is kind of where you're at. Let's see here. Yeah, you can connect to me on LinkedIn. Just look up. I don't know if I ever have any jobs all the time or anything like that, but but I don't mind connecting, of course. Just look up John Matthew Overwine, and I live in Cincinnati, so you should be able to see that on there. But you could just call me Matt, like I said. Well, it doesn't sound like there's too many other questions, so let me just drop in this last bit that I wrote. That's kind of a closing because I think it's I was trying to think of something important to give to you all. My learnings over the past years. And this is kind of what I got. So I'll read this. The deeper I've gotten into digital product design, the more I understand just how many jobs it touches. For instance, I've called myself a UI UX designer, a brand designer, a front-end developer, a Linux Apache server admin, a web designer, an interaction designer, an educator. But I use a little of all of this knowledge now as a digital product designer. But each of you, I guess I'm pointing, no. But for each other person who is added to the team who has any of those skills, it will exponentially improve the product, the final product, really, I guess is what I mean. I've learned there's only so much you can do yourself, and teamwork makes the dream work, as they say. And I really want to highlight that developers are a big part of what I cannot do, and that's why I respect. That's why I wanted to even come here is because I can't do everything in the development world, and it's good to know devs because they can do more stuff. The other thing, let's see here. One last part here, but I already answered questions. So yeah, here's the last bit here. In my opinion, the best of us, that meaning designers and developers, are advocates for the brand, the business, and most importantly, the users. And while I care about the brand and business, at least some of the time, I'm more concerned with where users sit in this sort of continuum, right? We live in an attention economy, and this is all my opinion, so just take it for what it's worth. We live in an attention economy built in some not so ethical ways. I think we can all probably agree to some extent about that. Think about Facebook and spreading false information. Think about phone addiction as it exists through notifications and interactions. If you ask me, it's up to the designers and developers together to design and develop ethical digital experiences for the future. No one was considering this stuff in the past. Do we need addictive, conflict-driven digital products to hypnotize our children and families into spending their entire lives looking at a screen as an ADHD type? I know I definitely feel the dopamine addiction myself and have removed most social media apps from my phone, everything but Reddit, actually. And I'm one of the people designing these interfaces, right? Like I'm designing interfaces and I'm removing them from my life because they're not ethical, in my opinion. Does the average person have enough of an understanding of the digital landscape to understand who is building their digital experiences and why? I think capitalism will always chase whatever drives profits. So some of us need to some of us need to be on the watch for what is ethical and what is not. I guess my final plug is I invite you, now I'm pointing, whoever you are and wherever you ended up, to consider this and join me in safeguarding the future against unethical interactions. Because really, if you think about it, there's a lot of them out there. But I'll step off my soapbox there and leave you all alone, I promise. Anything else?
Thank you so much for your time tonight, Matt. We really appreciate you being here and speaking with us and sharing your time, your talent, and treasure with us.
Yeah, I think I could do that presentation better if I tried over. I'll start now. No, I'm just joking.
I'll tell you what, come back, we'll do it again.
No, well, I think it's just I wanted to get in front of some devs and I wanted to share a little bit about digital product design. Hopefully you learned something. Yeah, feel free to reach out. I'll respond when and as best I can.
Great. Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.